I mentioned this in my last video, but you may be wondering why I'm bald. If you want to know, you can actually go over to my second channel. I am streaming games over there as well as making some new type of content specifically focused on the storytelling of video games, because there are so many other things out there that are worth exploring when it comes to storytelling, and storytelling is what I'm the most passionate about. So if you could go check that out, that would be wonderful, but I know that's not why you're here. Now, if you would have told me 2 years ago when I started this channel that I would be making a video on the amazing world of Gumball, I would have had a lot of questions. And in fact, I've never even thought about looking at that show. I love it. It is a fantastic show, but only recently did I go back and remember that they had a D&D episode. And it was funny because I was watching it and it's a very goofy episode. There's not a whole lot of stakes to it until we get to the end.
Sorry, Gumball. You rolled a 2 in stealth. Get back here.
And it made me realize that there are a lot of shows that have done D&D episodes. Looking outside things like Stranger Things, which have done D&D to death, there are a lot of TV shows out there which have done dedicated episodes to playing Dungeons & Dragons specifically. It's almost a staple. If you are a sitcom of any kind, eventually doing a D&D episode is just what you do. And some have done it really well, such as Community. And some have done it not so well, such as Gravity Falls.
You dare challenge probabilitism?
I'll flip the cat back and roll the dice. Don't step to the wizard, cause the wizard.
Too many dungeons and all that. Updated for the non-double deuce. Available wherever dope games are sold.
Peace!
No offense, I love that episode, and I love Gravity Falls, but they don't really encapsulate the heart of D&D. And so it's funny when you look at Amazing World of Gumball, because I think it is one of the best at finding the heart of Dungeons & Dragons and what's most important about it. See, if anybody doesn't know what Amazing World of Gumball is the Amazing World of Gumball is this really ridiculous and extremely creative show that was hosted on Cartoon Network. It was an amazing animated show that was always showing the hijinks of a character named Gumball, his brother Darwin, and his very interesting family. And pretty much every episode is a starting point, disaster, and an ending point. That's basically what the entire show does. But the D&D episode is interesting because it starts with conflict. It starts with the family absolutely at each other's throats. All of them have such a strong issue with each other. And then the father steps in.
I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my house.
Now, for anybody who's watched the show, Richard is your typical sitcom dad. He's dumb, he's stupid, he doesn't typically do anything right, and he usually causes problems.
Richard, I'm sad. Richard, we're sad.
But for this episode specifically, it's interesting because he's actually treated as a solution to the problem. He insists that because it is game night and it's his night to choose what they do, they are going to play Dungeons & Dragons. And we get to see them, well, play Dungeons & Dragons. And it's kind of fun to see. We get to see what is a typical understanding of the game. Now, do they get the rules right? No, absolutely not. In fact, they only ever roll 1d20 and they seem to seriously misunderstand how the game actually works, but that's fine. I don't think it's honestly that important that they get the rules specifically correctly or any of the mechanics. Again, it's about the heart. And do they get the heart right? Yeah. 8,000%. As you go through the entire episode, we get to see them doing ridiculous things and getting on the Dungeon Master's nerves. They seem to progress through the story by just simply fighting with each other over and over. They cannot get along.
Then I enter a rage and I swing my sword!
Okay, you're fighting again, but somehow your literal internal struggle frees you from the beast.
And boy, is that not every Beer and Pretzels D&D game that has ever been played. Constantly fighting with each other, the Dungeon Master desperate to keep the plot moving along, and so because of their antics and constant antagonization of each other, the Dungeon Master has to eventually just move the plot forward because we're getting nowhere. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of D&D games out there, and I think it's a really fun way of showing how to do it. See, the characters in the show have never gotten along with each other very well. Gumball and Darwin are about the closest to getting along because they are best friends, but even they butt heads a lot. And we continue to see that over the course of the show. We continue to see them trying to get through this D&D campaign by trying to antagonize the Dungeon Master and antagonize each other.
The Sphinx gives you this riddle. What comes up from the deepest, darkest mind, rots men's souls, and lingers in their senses?
The Dungeon Master's toots?
The answer was gold.
But this does eventually lead to a very interesting comeuppance. See, in the end, they pursue this monster and they find out that there was a trap laid out for them. They're supposed to find this treasure, but there's this monster in the way. And they try as hard as they can to fight it, but it seems that Richard is finally done playing around. He finally causes them to take a ton of damage and force them to take the game seriously. And it's funny because if he'd done this at the beginning of the game, they would have intentionally died because then they didn't have to play anymore. But not the case this time. They all take that damage and they all get serious. They all suddenly look at each other and realize they have to do something about this.
The Tarrasque successfully attacks. You all lose 30 HP.
they've become invested up until this point. They have, in this silly, stupid game, started to care about what's happening. Something that is a very common story for a lot of families playing D&D. And yet they still can't seem to beat it, but then they whisper and talk to each other, and they tell Richard, we're not done fighting as a family, but now we're blaming the person who forced us all to spend time together, you. And that's when the game starts. Now it is the players versus the Dungeon Master's monster, and they go and do the most ridiculous things, from insulting the barbarian so that she flies into a rage and attacks.
And I heard it say her hair looks great. Oh, said it makes her look 50 again.
I fly into an epic barbarian rage and take my anger out on the beast.
To seducing the monster and then breaking up with her over text message.
I break up with her by text message.
This house don't feel like home anymore.
Which, like, come on, that's some stupid D&D stuff, let's not lie. But nonetheless, they continue to play, they continue to fight, and eventually, they do end up defeating the monster. In this dramatic motion of watching them all watch the dice roll and then scream in excitement as it lands on a 20, we can all feel that moment of D&D excitement that we have also experienced in our lives. That moment of joy, of elation, of excitement. But here's the deal. At the end of the adventure, Richard presents to them the treasure they've been pursuing. And as they look inside the treasure chest, what do they find? A simple piece of paper that tells them that the treasure was the friends they made along the way.
You open it, and inside find only a small piece of parchment.
The greatest treasure on earth is the time you spend together. Lame.
It's not exactly that wording, but that's basically what it says. And Gumball looks up and it says like, what exactly any of us would be thinking. That's stupid, that's corny, that's cheesy. But isn't D&D all of those things? And we can see them still beginning to tear up, beginning to love each other, beginning to hug each other. It's a very heartwarming scene. Now, is this just a cartoon? Yeah, of course. But it rings something in all of us who play D&D. Even in the conflict and the ridiculousness, looking at this and seeing and remembering, D&D is important because at the end of the day, it helps us want to help each other even when we see each other at our worst. Even when things are miserable and terrible, even when we are using our characters to act out some of our worst tendencies, we all care about each other. We all want to be at the table. We all want to experience new things. We all want to play a game and tell a story together. And it's so funny because while they mess up so much about D&D, I feel like Gumball really did encapsulate the heart of D&D better than anything else I've ever seen. There are lots of shows that do this, and I honestly would love to review some of those episodes if you guys are excited for that. Community has 2 amazing D&D episodes, and I honestly would like to talk about the Gravity Falls episode at some point. There are a lot of shows out there that do D&D episodes, but Gumball struck special to me, because truly at the end of it, it told the message that is most important. We play because we want to be around the people we love, even when we can't stand them sometimes. It's important to care for each other and tell a story where we truly do care. And I think, frankly, that's wonderful.